In today's video, we're going to inspect this Volvo Penta engine to make sure it's good, make sure there's no cracks in the block or it doesn't have a blown head gasket or anything. We're going to check it out, and this applies to anyone who's thinking about buying a boat for the first time, or you don't know the history of the engine that you bought, unless you're a mechanic, because mechanics know all this stuff already. This particular motor is the 5.7. And I suspect that the engine block might have an internal crack because there is a little bit of beer foam on the oil cap. Now, with a cap like that, it doesn't mean that the engine is cracked. It could have a blown head gasket or even nothing wrong with it. We don't know if this motor was sunk and they didn't drain all the water out of the block or anything like that. So, I mean, it could be something simple like just a little bit of water getting into the system, because it doesn't take much to make that thing look milky. First thing we'll do is we pull out the oil stick, the dipstick, and it's a little higher than normal. There's no evidence of any milky oil. Of course, a dipstick won't show that all the time, especially if the engine's been sitting. But if the oil is all the way up the stick, that would be a really bad sign. Because I was in the business, I've actually bought hundreds of boats throughout the years, and I've seen many different things. Out of state, sometimes I'd take chances, sometimes I'd luck out, sometimes I'd get burnt. But some of the strangest things I've ever seen is a valve that went right through a piston. Pretty bad day there. But in any case, when you're buying a boat, there's a lot of dishonest people out there, and some actually don't even know that there's anything wrong with their engine. So we're going to do a few basic checks here just to make sure this one's good. I'll briefly touch on the 4 cylinders too, but as far as these GM 8 cylinders and the V6s also, where they like to crack is an inch below the head and straight across in between the freeze plugs. It seems like all the freeze plugs are on strike during the winter because they don't usually pop out. Sometimes it's just a line across the top. As long as the water's not mixing with the oil, it's no big deal. JB welded, enjoy your summer. But sometimes they freeze really hard and you'll get a big T crack, or even harder, it'll be a big I. And chances are that motor is going to be shot. This particular motor doesn't have any cracks on the outside, visually. And where they also like to crack sometimes is underneath the intake manifold in the valley. They can crack there and you won't even know. There's been cases where blocks have cracked even though a marina winterized the boat. And what usually happens is when they drain the block, they pull this plug out. They don't actually stick a screwdriver up in there to break anything that's been caught up in there. Because if your boat was running through sand or whatnot, or even if the impeller started breaking up, all that stuff can actually go in there and plug this up. And where you think it's good, it's actually not. I've seen a case where I pulled this out, a little bit of water came out, I thought it was good. I stuck the screwdriver up in there and a whole bunch of sand and stuff came out. This particular one wasn't too bad. Back to the internal crack. What we're going to do is pressurize the system. So we're going to bypass the impeller pump and we're going to go straight to the thermostat housing. Then we're also going to isolate the manifolds, and we're going to take one of these lines and loop it to itself. We are going to use a garden hose to do this test because it supplies about 32 pounds of pressure. If there's a crack in the valley, this will definitely find it, and it'll start filling the engine up with water, and we should be able to detect it by looking at the dipstick. Now, if you start out with a high level on the dipstick, you should still test this anyway, because you don't know if somebody put 10 quarts of oil in it or not. So you could drain a little out, and remember, if the engine's been sitting, water will come out first, if there was any in there, and then the oil. And of course, if it's been running, you'll get just coffee all the time. So let me turn on the water. Right, I can hear it filling up. Those hoses are rock hard. Hopefully nothing comes apart. And I'm going to leave it sit like this for about 5 minutes. So I shut the water off and I'm leaving it set for probably another 5 minutes just to see if These hoses still hold pressure. I just shut it off, so we'll wait a little bit, but in the meantime, we'll check the oil. I can't tell if we got that in the camera or not. Okay. It's still the same, just slightly above full, so there's no indication that there's an internal crack or say even a blown head gasket, but we'll do a compression test just to make sure. And now with the water turned off, it'd be a good time to pull out those block plugs and blow everything out of there out. Right, with the water on, the block plugs open, I'm flushing the system out for any sand or anything. Now, if you have one of these GM 3.0s, the 4-cylinders, sorry to hear that. These things suck. I'm not a fan of them. As a matter of fact, I don't even think they put them in cars. If you do a search on it, it says because they're low RPM motors. I think it's because they suck. They are notorious for cracking behind this manifold, which is intake and exhaust. And to get down there with a mirror and see is almost impossible because it's so close. And usually what I'll do is if you see a rust line going down here, that's a good indication that the block is cracked. And they crack all the way across the top. So I'm going to use my inspection cam to check this one real quick. All right, here we go. Oh, that definitely looks like a crack. You know, that could be a casting line. I'm not sure. Oh, that don't look good. In order to really tell, you'd actually have to unbolt the manifold, slide it back, and take a look. On to testing the compression. I'm only going to show one. The rest I'll write down on a piece of paper. If you have one of these triggers, it's really nice to use. Otherwise, you can use a screwdriver. And to hook it up, one lead, this has 2 leads. One goes to the ignition wire, okay? And the other one can go, just follow the battery cable, where the battery cable attaches to the solenoid, or you can simply clamp it right on there. If you want to use the ignition switch on the boat, if the motor's in the boat, you must disconnect the coil, all right? You don't want that thing firing up when you're trying to do a compression test. I'm ready to go on cylinder number 2. Most people skip this part, but it's pretty important to know what your compression's at. I'm hoping between, say, 140 and 160, but even if they're all at 130, that should be fine too. I'll tell you what, if it's over 200, I'm actually keeping this motor for an old car. Here we go. Okay, that's about, say, 155. All right, results are in. Everything looks good except for cylinder 3 and 5. And what's concerning is they're next to each other. So, I mean, it could be a number of things yet. It could be a blown head gasket right in between the 2 cylinders. It could be valves aren't sealed or need to be lapped. Or it could be the rings are stuck to the piston. So I checked all of these dry. I didn't put any oil in them. And the reason why I do that is because in case of something like this. So I'm going to add some oil to cylinder 3 and 5. Now, if the compression goes up, then it's going to be the rings. The rings are seized to the piston, and you can buy stuff to try and free that up a little bit. But if the compression stays the same, then it's either going to be the valves, I got leaky valves, or it'll be a head gasket. And then the head would have to come off. I should probably show this. So right now we're in cylinder 3. We'll see what the gauge says. Yep, very nice. Here's cylinder 5. I think this was the worst one at 125. Let's see what it is now. All right, Perfect. I should mention the very first time I started this motor up in the boat and I shut it off, gas was still leaking out of the jets down in through the carburetor. So this, maybe it had something to do with those two cylinders being low. Maybe it washed them out. Not sure. In any case, I'm going to run this. If the compression doesn't come back up naturally, I'll try this product. I'll put it in those two cylinders and leave it set for a day and then run it again. But right now I'm going to start this thing up. And the way we do that is you just need another hot wire and you run it from positive of the battery to the positive on the coil. I just dumped a little gas down the carb. We'll hook my wire up. She might smoke a little bit. I'm surprised it actually ran that long with a little bit of gas in there, but it's probably still getting some from the carburetor. I definitely have to drain the oil out of this thing because it's got a ton of gas in it, and rebuild the carburetor, maybe a tune-up, change the plugs. I think it should be a good engine.